So I think I wisely waited 12 hours, did not watch the actual interview from last night as it aired live, or live for tape, if you will, with George Stephanopoulos and President Joe Biden as he tried to right the ship over last week's very poor debate coverage with this first televised, first interview of any sort since the actual debate. And I think I did the right thing by waiting 12 hours so I had time to let the commentators do what they're going to do and then watch it myself and sort of break it down. And this is a quick analysis, but let me set the record straight by repeating what I've been saying very openly and very consistently for 2 years at the time. And I guess the whole 4 years since we've been dealing with Trump Biden and the upcoming Trump Biden again. And this is being said without jokes, without sarcasm, no witty banter as I try to do that to draw in any views and clicks. So I know that you know exactly how I feel about this whole thing in general. Biden v. Trump is worse than Trump v. Biden 4 years ago when President Trump was running against the vice president, former vice president candidate Joe Biden. It was bad. This year, incumbent Biden versus former President Trump is even worse. Both these guys are old, and they both are proof that the major parties have no faith in their benches or the actual future of their parties, what's to come. They're consumed by so much to keep the power they think they need to have now because the other folks will just take their power away. One guy is sticking this thing to prove a point. The other guy is trying to save his own ass. And depending on how you look at this, it's the other guy who's the other guy. So we are stuck with that. We also had this debate last week that showed that an older Joe Biden is not as sharp as he was maybe even a week ago. And after a good, but a still softball performance by interviewing with George Stephanopoulos last night as I record this video, does a better job of reinforcing that he's lost his fastball. We are at a serious point on this way to our most important election in the history of our nation, although they say that every time, and technically it is every single time because it builds on the future. But as this is essentially the next existential crisis after the last existential crisis, we are in some serious issues. My views on Trump is simple. Let me state this. My views on Trump is simple. And I try to cover what he does and what his people does and what goes on through his candidacy and what happens as fair and balanced as possible. But he, Donald Trump, is and always has been a buffoon. He's found enough sycophants who they're just obsessed with power and chaos around him that will bolster his candidacy. And there's enough citizens out there who want anything but the GD establishment. And so they'll take this crazy over anything else going forward because it's not the other crazy out there they're afraid of. I've said that. This is what I believe. So you can take that as you will. But as a voting person, I actually vote right of center. I actually am more Republican, not so much conservative, but Republican than I am Democrat. So there's that. And I can't even stand behind a guy like Trump because he is just bad. But there are plenty of people on the Democratic side that can lead the party and the nation without sucking the country into a crazy, super, ultra liberal boogeyman, the agenda the other side is trying to fight against. But Joe is the only man who can beat Donald Trump. That's what we were sold on 4 years ago. Only Joe can do this. There were a bunch of other folks on there. I like Seth Moulton. He probably would have been a pretty good president. Didn't have a chance because didn't have the name exposure. Eric Swalwell. Yeah, he has some China leanings going forward, but he probably would have been there. Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg. But Joe is the man who could beat Donald Trump, who was the president somehow and was who we were fighting against. We're sold that 4 years ago, and now we're still being sold that Donald Trump can only be defeated by Joe Biden again. I have described this election as a choice we have been given, and it's not a great choice. I'm looking into November, going to our voting machines here in Arkansas, pressing a button or just pressing a touchscreen basically. And it's a vote for a poke in the eye versus a poke in the eye. I've used more graphic versions of the statements. People who know me and in conversations we've had at work know exactly what I'm saying. And it doesn't get much better in the picture version. And it doesn't get much better as a choice because it's poking an eye, poking an eye. Each of those are not great choices. Point intended with the poke part. And I've voted in presidential elections since H.W. Bush versus Clinton versus Perot. And the last time I was so disappointed in my choices available was the possibility of getting McCain versus Bradley, but it turned into W. Bush versus Gore. And, of course, Trump versus Biden, the first one. The problem with having your superstar starter lose his fastball or his crossover or some of the mustard he was famous for on the deep ball when he was a rookie is that you just can't pull him from the game and move him down the roster. It doesn't work that way. There is just as much politics in navigating an aging sports ball player as there is in navigating leaders of the free world, and maybe even more so, be honest. And here's where it all comes down to in the end of this whole thing. Both candidates, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, need to go somewhere and sit down and shut up. One really needs to shut up. Both candidates would have to be forced to get out of the way. Only one party has the power to possibly do it. They don't have the will. Neither has a manager with the resolve to actually walk to the mound and tell the pitcher he's done for the night and maybe for his career. The Stephanopoulos interview has done nothing more than reinforce my need to prepare myself for that poke in the eye in November. But what do you think about the interview? What do you think about the actual prospects of the grandness that is Biden versus Trump, Trump versus Biden too, whatever? What do you think about the future of our nation and whether the existential threat is here or whether I'm just trying to get more clicks? Well, I am trying to get more clicks, but what do you think about the whole entire thing? Give me some comments. Let's talk about it in the comments here in the video. You can also reply back in any way you're finding this actual piece and let me know. If you're new to the Conversation Project, thank you so much for joining in there. Make sure you do some of our many calls to action, starting off with stopping by our website. This is theconversationproject.com. Join us, follow us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, follow us on the X, and follow us on TikTok for the hot takes that come down there. Consider sticking with us and look for more things on what we call things you might have heard. What we're looking for is people who follow us on Facebook and follow us on X to engage in the news articles we post every 50 minutes. So we have a great conversation, a greater conversation with people on what news stories there are to talk about. Yes, Joe Biden is the headline that's going to overtake the entire weekend and upcoming weeks. There's also other stories popping in there that you can engage in and tell us that are just as important, just as dire, just as cool to talk about, because it's all about actual conversation. You don't have to like what I have to say. You don't have to agree with my point of view. Let's sit down and talk about it. You can agree that coffee is awesome. Let's do that. Thank you for joining us for this video. More to come down the line.